Boker Tov, everybody. We are set there. Can you hear us? Just raise your hand if you can hear. Wonderful. We are in business. So today's session is about the rise of Gush Emunim, and it's important as we are going to see, because Gush Emunim today is a key factor in the current coalition of the Prime Minister Netanyahu. And what we are going to discuss is their nationalist agenda and some of their non-democratic practices over the years.
How do you translate Gush Emunim?
I'll talk.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't do the reading, so you don't know what you're missing.
I read, but I have some.
Oh, you did read it. Okay. So I'll do brief introduction to the National Religious Party, Mafdal, before 67. There are two crucial events in the history of Israel in the latest part of the 20th century. One is the Six-Day War, the other one, the Yom Kippur War. And up to 1967, the religious party were a loyal coalition member of the Labour Party. They only cared about the status quo, which means that Israel will keep the Shabbat, no national activities, bus transportation will take care on Shabbat, Kashrut will be observed in all national institutions and in the army. So we have Shomrei Kashrut, Mashgichei Kashrut in all the military bases, and religious holiday will be observed. So everything that has to do with practices of Judaism was institutionalized in the country. There was one glaring exception. My hometown, Haifa, which was a red town, the only place in the country that they allowed public transportation on Shabbat. Buses were driving on Shabbat, unheard of any other place in the country, and that because of the mayor, Abba Hushi, who was a hardcore and very strong leader in the Mapai, which is the leading Labour Party at the time. So this is the religious party. Most of them were very moderate. To understand their level of moderation, I will go to the day that Jerusalem was liberated in the Six-Day War. The only vote in the government against going to the old city of Jerusalem came from the National Religious Party. What will Russia do? Will the Soviet Union bomb Israel with atomic bomb? That was the discussion that was uncovered a few years later in the government. It tells you how much they were moderate and fearful of what the superpowers will say. They were an attractive coalition member for the Labour Party, the socialist coalition of Ben-Gurion, because they didn't intervene in national policy, international policies, or economic policies. Only their turf about religious status quo interested them. And the issue of conversion and divorce and marriage, they were all in their turf. In addition, Ben-Gurion gave them the permission to have their own separate national religious schools system.
I just wanted to tell everybody that Norma said, I don't know if you know that Howard is in the hospital.
Oh, I'm sorry.
He's been sick for a long time. He broke a bone, and I'm
sorry.
Yeah.
It's a week ago.
It's
Wow.
a week ago, but she is
He fell on the ground, or
at home, and Norma fell on top of him, but she's fine. And
Which hospital?
The one nearby,
Yeah, I thought she was at Gottlieb.
yeah, but I'm not sure if he's still there because Gottlieb is so close and I was on the.
I think he's in the senior.
Gottlieb
the
is
senior
closing. It may be the senior rehab already. But I just wanted, she just wanted to make sure that you were aware that
No,
she's not
no,
boycotting
I'm
your
so
class.
sorry. No.
I know,
They're all kind of, wow, I'm so sorry. Well,
sure.
so recapping and continuing, then came the 6-Day War, and 6-Day War was a major cataclysmic event up to the 6-Day War, and we have a member who is older than I, and he probably remember it better because he was in the army. There was a sense at one point of a catastrophe that will come on the people of Israel. I was in the 11th grade, we were digging graves before the war with the anticipation that will be a catastrophic kind of event. The chief of staff had a mental breakdown, Rabin.
Yeah.
And then,
Is that nachon? Yeah.
yeah,
Whoa.
yeah. For a day or two, they said he had a nicotine poisoning, but he just had a horrible sensation. And then,
Mark and I were at the movie theater watching all the newsreels. Would you believe they had newsreels?
oh yeah, Fox News, a different Fox. So, and then the unbelievable war that took place and changed the Middle East and gave the Israel the breadth in terms of geography of space that never had before. Yeah, if you came to Israel before 67 and you drove to the south, I mean, I was we were doing work in the border, in the settlement of the kibbutzim, helping them with in high agricultural season. There was from Ashkelon to the south, along the border, we had to have a military escort. We are talking from noon to sunset. After sunset, no one drives. That gives you a sensation about the fragility and insecurity along the borders before the 67 war. And then
I see a hand here.
yes. No? Hand?
I just looked like I was raising my hand. I was grabbing my coffee cup. Sorry.
That you will have time to talk. Well, that's
That's her
okay.
bad side. It's shaking.
No, it's fine.
I was there in 66 as a visitor, 18 years old. And I just want you to know that I was totally, as a visitor, I had totally unaware that we were as vulnerable as we were. I was in America 4 years before that. And I went to Israel to meet with all 6 of my aunts and uncles who lived in Israel, my mother's brothers and sisters, cousins. I had 16 cousins in Israel. And when it was essentially not a rich, I don't want to say the word poor, but it was definitely not a rich country. People did not have necessarily warm water 24 hours a day in their apartments. They all had flush toilets, but which we didn't have in Romania. But beside that, it was just a normal, ordinary place, maybe 3 steps above where I came from in communist Romania. It is now, I consider it the most wonderful place in the world to be a tourist.
Okay. But it was a very, as community, people were together, and I mean,
Absolutely,
if you grew up as a kid in Israel, it was heaven in terms of
absolutely. People
going
went
to
cafes.
youth movement. Books, education was very good if you were able to get into high school because it was competitive. If you want to add something, please feel comfortable. It's an open-ended conversation.
And I paid, by the way, for it myself from the job I had at age 17.
Wow.
Well, 67 was different than 73 because we initiated the war as opposed to get surprised in 73. I was drafted for a whole month before the war in
In
preparation.
67.
67.
Yeah.
In preparation for the war. And Israel at least a month and a half waited to the international community
To do
for
something.
the right time to preemptive attack. Egypt first, because it was a threat. Suez was a threat to Israel.
But there was a real fear. I mean, I was not afraid at all. But there was a sensation in the affluent communities, people send their kids out of the country. So there was, and then we had jubilation. A miracle happened. And that's the interesting part where the religious party totally transformed from being on the margin, passive partner in the leadership of the country, minding only religious businesses. The liberation of the West Bank, Judea and Samaria was for them for
A miracle.
divine intervention of God. Something else is of interest here, and here I'm going to talk about the Cookish tradition. Merkaz Arav, the rabbinical center led at the beginning by Rabbi Avraham Yitzchak Kook. In the 1930s, the chief rabbi of Israel, what he did was transformative because he said secular Zionism are emissaries of God. Never mind that they are secular, eating treif, don't go to mikveh, don't observe the Shabbat. They are emissaries of God, and he rehabilitated secular Zionism. So he gave a different approach to the coming of Messiah. Messiah is going to come in two different ways. First by Messiah ben Yosef, which are the secular Jews, and we don't know the ways of God. But this is they are sent by God. So traditionally, if you are ultra-Orthodox, you believe that everything will be created by God. We don't need to do anything. It's all, we need to just observe the Torah and observe mitzvot. Everything will come by God. And he said, no, the secular Zionists are emissaries of God, and therefore, you, religious parties, need to be involved in the activity of secular Zionism.
Was there a push to have Israel be less religious at that time? To maybe not follow the Shabbat and maybe not have kashrut in the army?
No.
So it wasn't under
From 48 on, Ben Gurion made a deal with the religious party. That's what we are
The
going to
religious
do.
party was satisfied.
Oh, yes. And he was satisfied because they didn't interfere in high politics, international relations, economic policies of a socialism. Whatever he did, that was fine. They approved automatically. They were always partners, loyal partners to Ben Gurion. And to a lesser extent, there were other ultra-religious party of Agudat Israel. They did not recognize Zionism as emissaries of God, but they were acknowledged the existence of the state and supported whatever was done and received subsidized contribution for their yeshivot, religious seminaries, and for separate education. They have their own education. And that was a tragedy because you have two different systems of religious education of the national religious, belong to NPR, the National Religious Party, and then the ultra-Orthodox. They had their own different education separated
And Agudat was
boys and
also
girls. Say it again?
Agudat Israel was
Also,
ultra orthodox.
Yeah, also Orthodox.
That's where
So-
my grandparents were.
Well, look, I grew up, I was not part of this, but my cousins, some of them went to a religious Orthodox. I mean, real cousin. Their mother was the sister of my father. My father
None
was
of my family
absolutely
did that.
secular. All of them are religious. All of them belong to Gush Emunim today. And so we have a rift in the family of so. Not all of them. Some of the girls are against what is happening.
But Chabad is a supporter of Israel as
Yeah.
a country.
Oh, they are Zionists.
They are Zionists, and Chabad, as I understand it, is the only Hasidic movement which is.
No, there are others too. But let's not go here.
Okay.
Nevertheless, Chabad doesn't have prayer for Israel.
They don't?
I know.
Who said so?
They don't say it.
They don't say.
They don't say it on Shabbat morning, like all conservative and
I went to Chabad in Minnesota. They do
So
say.
it depends on the rabbi.
It depends on rabbis, and
Yeah,
in
in
Minnesota they
Miami,
say it. So I'm not going
let's not
to
go there.
nuances of all kinds. What is important, and I would like to talk about Gush Emunim, 1973, 1967, there is a transformation. You have a young leadership
Okay.
coming to power, and your reading is focusing on the profile of Moshe Levinger. And if you recall from this massive reader of Moshe Levinger, do you remember what he says about him? I mean, why he was so successful, this guy? He was just a plain guy, a religious guy, was educated in Merkaz Arav, but he was in the Nachal, so he was respectful of labor. And in 1968, all of a sudden, we opened the newspaper, and this is Erev Pesach. This guy is going to Hebron and take over a hotel and doesn't move from the hotel. He hired the hotel but doesn't leave it after the Passover. And that's the beginning of a settlement in the West Bank.
It was not Kiryat Arba.
No. In the center of Hebron, they had a hotel, outskirts of Hebron, Park Hotel. He stayed with his family and some of his students. And he established a pattern of how to do something and create facts on the ground. So first establishing a hotel, then you have a police and military protection, then you push out and you build up a yeshiva close by, and then you establish yourself in a military base. Within a few years, you get post factum approval to create some kind of a civil settlement in the area. So it's the outskirts of Hebron, and that's the beginning of Kiryat Arba.
You know, that's like the dog wagging the tail wagging the
Right,
dog.
the dog, yeah. It's true.
It's amazing.
It's amazing. What is very interesting, they said, well, we are not acting in illegal terms. Zionists did the same. When they created a settlement under the Ottoman and then under the British, that's the Zionist pattern of illegal is okay, as long as it serves a higher purpose. So this is the very beginning of creating settlement on the ground. First Kiryat Arba, then you have Ofra, then you have Kedumim, and then you have Ma'ale Adumim. If you are going today from Jerusalem to the Dead Sea, on the right side, you see a town. And that's Ma'ale Adumim, I mean real town. It's like River Forest and Oak Park come together. And this is the pattern of creating settlement in the West Bank. They are not agricultural settlement. The purpose for setting them is some kind of a satellite urban center with highways to workplace inside the Green Line, which is 367 borders. And this is what they do. And that's attract religious people, but also people who cannot afford the high sky-rise prices of land and building and housing in the Green Line. The Green Line is the separation between the West Bank and Israel proper, the 367 borders.
Places like Ashkelon, which were inside the Green Line.
Oh, yeah.
Were being used when we came from Romania and we were supposed to go to Israel. We were what today is considered suburbs of Tel Aviv. They were being given as shikunim to live in low income housing.
Mhm.
We came in 62. So
Well, it's all over the country. Okay, my friends, comments from the reading so far. Yes.
Those two terms, Orthodox and ultra-Orthodox,
Oh.
is it pretty difficult to distinguish in the two, or?
Oh, you can tell them apart, absolutely, when you see
Yes.
them. All Orthodox are the knitted kippah on the head, and they dress civil. And ultra-Orthodox are always with black outfits, big hats, bearded people, and they live in separate neighborhood. Mostly you can see them in Jerusalem, in area of Mea Shearim or in Bnei Brak.
Politically, what is the biggest difference between them?
Politically today,
Or then, I mean,
Orthodox, Agudat Israel, Polei Agudat Israel, United Judaism, Ultra United Judaism, the Workers of United Judaism, which was a proletariat kind of organization. Now they collapsed and came to one. National Religious Party are the Orthodox.
okay.
And then
they-
there are many other divisions over time. In the early 80s, National Religious Party was all Ashkenazi. So the Sfaradim said, what about us? So they established in the early 80s Shas. And Shas is led and is a combination of moderation, but also in certain element of extremism, supported, believe it or not, by Orthodox Ashkenazi rabbi. It's a complicated story in a different set.
they have become ultra-Orthodox.
They are and they are not. They are moderate in terms of Shas, for example. I'm running back and forth because of the question, but Shas was instrumental in supporting Rabin to become a prime minister and basically getting rid of the Likud party in power. And they were behind the Oslo Accord. So it's
Difficult.
It's waving back and forth all the time. And today Shas has second thought about supporting Netanyahu judicial revolution, so they may withdraw at one point. Who knows what will happen? It's unbelievable story in its own right. So now we are coming to discuss the rise of the Guttermunim established in 19 after. So we had euphoria from 1967 to 73. Then we have the shock of Yom Kippur War. when we have the shock, we have a sensation 67 to 73 of a Jewish empire. We are going to rule forever. War is over. We crushed all the Arab countries, forget it, nothing will happen. And that was a mistake. The military was not prepared. And there was a war. And you remember it, you were there at the beginning. You want to talk about it or no? Not much.
Not so much about the war, but there are a lot of people that about the feeling in Israel. It was a feeling of conquest and euphoria, but there are a lot of people, including Leibovich and others, that says that that's the end of Israel because we became a conqueror state.
Yeah.
That rules
Others.
poor Arabs in the territories. So became an empire that are corrupt. So there are a lot of people that saw the negative aspect of controlling our population around us. And they're warning about it, about the morale and.
Were they listened to?
Oh, yes, yes.
Yeah, but they were not
But
strong
not
in
much.
politics. Their
I mean,
voice-
you're winning. Why do anything?
Well, Mark and I were in Israel at the time with small children, and we were definitely we heard people say that the draft will be over.
Right. I can tell you, I was at the Hebrew University. I was in a tank division. And I remember David Elazar, the chief of staff, he came in May of 73, May. The war was in October. He said, we are an empire. Don't worry. We were serving 30 days a year, recruited because we were in combat.
Yeah.
Don't worry.
We were without
We
children in 73.
are going to dismantle the draft. It will not be 30, 40 days. It will be 10 days, maybe. We are an empire.
Was there thought to expand Israel at any point?
Say it again.
Empires usually grow. Was there thought?
No,
that-
we were an empire as it is. Now imagine before 67 and after 67, you have the Sinai. You can drive forever. And you have this unbelievable shows of Nueva and Sharm el-Sheikh. I mean, the beatniks on all the draftees from the US came to Israel. Hebrew University, because of the Vietnam draft, quadrupled in 2 years, from 8,000 to 25,000. I mean, it was unbelievable.
We
What
were
was
in Israel, and it was a totally different place.
from 66? Absolutely, yeah.
I mean, if you went up to Hebrew University in 66, it was a Gurnisht with Gurnisht. It was essentially a little outpost, and there was the Knesset.
Yeah. Well, and then it changed.
Absolutely.
If I can put one comment,
Please.
you said the draft, they thought to cancel the draft after 73. Before 67, they made the compensatory drafting shorter. It used to be 3 years, and I was in
Oh, you were in the
Class.
2.5?
the 2.5.
Ah,
So they cut the
Wow.
length of the service
Wow.
before 67 already. People that went to the army few months after me in 64 already served the 3 years because they got Tzav Shmone
right.
after the war. So they had 3
And,
years.
and
doing
then
that.
they established 3 years period because of the war. And unfortunately, there was a war of attrition, 1969, 1970,
I remember that.
and about 1,000 Israelis died in that war.
Okay.
So we are coming now to the very euphoric time, and then the unbelievable shock of the aftermath of the Yom Kippur War, and the realization that war, as we know it, is not over. This is the situation that we are in the Middle East. But in terms of religion, what was happening was there was a renaissance of religious belief. Messiah, we need Messiah to come and help us. A sensation of helplessness that we need to go to have special classes and courses on Judaism because secular is not good enough. The Labour Party failed us. I mean, up to 73, they believe Labour forever. They had the advertisement of 69 or 73 before the election of the honeycomb. Labour Party is a honeycomb. Who can replace Golda? Golda is heaven. Who can replace Dayan? Dayan is Mr. Security. Abba Ibn, he knows all the languages of the world. Who can challenge him in the debate? That was the psyche and the collective mentality of Israelis. Begin was on the margin, relic of some unbelievable past. He is not fit to be a prime minister. No one is fit. The religious party, who are they? They care about kashrut, forget them. And then came the war, and there was a transformation in mentality. And the transformation was within the religious circles. A new young generation took over. Rabbi like Druckmann, Hammer, Ben Meir, youngsters who took over, pushed out the old or the status quo, all the religious party, and they said we need religious education, reinforce Judaism in the secular section, and also reclaim the land of Israel for us. Forget, we cannot leave the West Bank empty. We need to go and establish settlement and make it our dream house in Judea and Samaria. This is our homeland, our biblical homeland, and they made the change. I recall I was at the Hebrew University. I was recruited to seminar on Judaism, intense seminar on Judaism, initiated by the Ministry of Education, at that time still Labour Party, but a modified Labour Party, hesitant, what are we going to do? So religion became to enter into the curriculum in a very aggressive way. You have seminar, 2, 3, 4 weeks. You take high school kids to Judaism seminars in Judaism, all over the country. And that was transformative in a way. So the absolute belief in secular socialism started to dwindle. And that's the rise of the religious party. And we have another element is the transformation of the center of this ideology of Gush Emunim, which was in Merkaz Harav, center of the rabbi in Yemin Moshe in Jerusalem, where you have the son of Abraham Kook, now Tzvi Yehuda Kook, who had a very similar but different ideology than his father. His belief was that we are not going to believe that eventually divine will help us to redeem the land. We need to redeem it ourselves actively, and we can do it by claiming the land. Eretz Israel is the center. You have sacralization of the land of Israel, which means we believe in Torah, in the people of Israel, and in the sacredness of the land. You have a saying in Judaism, Yehareg vebal yavor, you die for those 3 elements, Avodah Zarah, Torah, and the people of Israel, and the people of Israel. What he said in Avodah Zarah, meaning quitting 1 inch of the land of Israel. That was the new radical interpretation of Gush Emunim. I'm going to read you a citation from 1969 that blew my mind from that kind of ideology made by Hanan Porat, who became a member of the Knesset. And here is what he said about Eretz Israel. It's a mysterious issue. His base is a spiritual attachment to matter and soul. If one goes deeply into the understanding of the relation between the body and the soul, or of the relationship between man and a woman, and penetrates the mystery of the unity of matter and spirit, one is able to understand the love and the appreciation for each part of Eretz Israel, just as there is value for every limb of the human body. Eretz Israel has an element of life in it and is tied to spirit, so that a surrender of any part of it is like giving up a living organ. Now think about it. Giving any part of the land for negotiated peace, whoever it is sacrilegious. It's element of, or it's a living organ. The land is a living organ.
Very extreme.
Crazy stuff. Yeah.
She'ela. So what was going on with the non-Orthodox people living in Israel? I mean,
Like me.
and yeah, I mean,
I thought it nuts.
okay, but you thought it's nuts, but what did you do?
But it comes subtle. I mean, in retrospect, you think combination of things, but this stuff came out in a subtle way. Here a statement, there a statement. You mentioned earlier Yeshayahu Leibovich, and Yeshayahu Leibovich is a religious person. And I mean, he was the chief scientist of Israel in 1948 in the war. He lost his son in 1948 in the war. So you cannot tell about him, he is a softy leftist, he's not. But he denounced this kind of talk as a quasi-proto-fascist.
The Russians were coming then. The Russians, I think, I could be wrong, I don't remember what exact year the big immigration was.
The big immigration is in 1990, but there is a smaller immigration than in 1970s.
Okay.
Small.
Now, my cousin who left Munkachevo, which is the Ukraine, Munkachevo, and Munkac, in Hungarian it was Munkac, and he spoke Hungarian. He went to Moscow to become a dentist. He and his cousin, who became a doctor, came back to Munkac. He told his father, Apu, we are going to Eretz Yisrael. This is a kid who didn't have a bar mitzvah, didn't know a word of Yiddish, didn't know a word of Hebrew, didn't know how to daven. He went off to Moscow and he became an ardent Zionist.
Mm-hmm.
He came to Israel. He met my cousin, who was the younger sister of, she was a lawyer, younger sister of my cousin, who was a dentist. The country put them together. The two of them are married. They come to the United States in 2005. We're talking to them, and we were very worried. For some reason, in 2000 and early 2003 or so.
You had the Intifada in Israel.
Well, we were very, you're right. We were very, very, very worried about Israel surviving, existing. You know, how can we help? What can we do? We are Americans. We are not prepared to go to Israel, but we want to be sure that and Peter looked at me. This is Peter, who went to Moscow and became an ardent Zionist.
But by the way, Israel, I don't want to make it catastrophic. I mean, there is a major element of crisis now with the current prime minister. But if you look, generally speaking, if you a year before the election, people in Israel are at the highest level of happiness in the Western world.
Question about
Level of education is very high.
I agree, but Peter, who who came to Israel and he married a Zmora. I mean, my cousin had been there. My uncle was there since 1938. And he said, Judy, we have survived all these thousands of years and we didn't have a country. The Jewish people, you will survive. Maybe this particular experiment is not going to be successful, but we Jews are going to be successful. Now, is he religious today? No, they moved out of Yerushalayim and they are now in Herzliya because it was too religious when they both retired.
Okay, I want other people to talk. That's
Okay, I understand. I just wanted to say I had never heard this from an Israeli and it shocked me.
what shocked you, that people are irreligious?
He said this experiment, the 70, at that time it was a 70, he thought of it as a 70-year experiment,
Yeah.
was going to
Well,
fall apart. And he didn't think it was catastrophic. To us, it was the biggest, I'm a Holocaust survivor's child.
You say about experiment about the Western Bank.
No, the experiment of Israel as the Jewish homeland
All together.
altogether.
Uh-huh.
well,
Historical.
there are all kind of view, but why would you?
But, Israel is alive and well. And
Not only is it alive and well, it's rich and wonderful, and it's ahead of every country except for the United States.
Let's hear other. I want to hear other voices
I'm
here
sorry,
on the reading. That's okay. You're passionate about it, which is wonderful. Comments of what you read, what I said, what you have on Gush Emunim.
So what is the origin of the name? Block
Block of the Faithful.
Block of the
Block
Faithful,
of the
right.
Faithful. Right. And they are what is known as I gave a book. The reading that I gave is probably the top political scientist in the country, in Israel, who is from the Labour Party, I think originally, so he has a bend to what he is saying, but I don't think it affects his, it's a sound.
So what is their
scholarship.
political platform?
What?
What is Gush Emunim is political platform?
Religion.
Can you summarize it?
They are spread in different places, but they are right wing and they belong to different parties. They have supporters from the Labour Party, supporters from the religious party, supporter from Likud. So and the idea is basically to create a very effective lobby group with no clear affiliation to one party. So at one point, they got support from Labour Party, from Paris, to establish the first settlement in Elon Moreh.
So are they a political movement?
They are political movement, smart political movement that is connected to whatever will help them to establish settlement in the Judea and Samaria and Sinai.
And they also form military conscription, right?
For military, oh yes, they
They
are regular. They are originally from the National Religious Party. Most of them, about 90% of the early stages, are Ashkenaz. Yeah.
I thought it was fascinating when they talked about the survey where they were going into the vigilante
Right.
movement and that they were talking about, you said
We
you
will
had
go.
it was toward the end of the
Right.
reading, but the people who bought into breaking laws
Kahana.
and
Not
feeling
yet, not
comfortable.
Kahana. They had their own. You read it about the creation of the Jewish underground that put as his main idea bombing, toppling the
Rock, yeah, Dome of the Rock.
Dome of the Rock.
But the feel of the Eretz Israel Shlema
Yeah.
wasn't only religious.
No, it's
Because the right, including Begin, which were not Orthodox at all, believe in Eretz Israel Shlema.
That's true.
So,
But they were not Gush Emunim.
no, separate.
Separate.
Gush
Gush
Emunim
Emunim
was
are
not the
religious.
only
No, they are
activity.
sure. Gush Emunim were smart enough to get support from Leman Eretz Israel Shlema for the Land of Israel, which was Labor Party. Labor Party. Then you had they are getting support from the Labor Party proper, from Yigal Allon, who was in the government, Minister of Foreign Affairs, who was for establishing some kind of a settlement with affiliation with security purposes on the mountains that will overlook Israel. So only security posts.
Who is their leader?
The leader, Cook. Tzvi Yehuda Cook is the leader. Merkaz Arav is the center, and Merkaz Arav create the how shall we say the bastion. You come to Merkaz Arav, we are talking thousands of students, and you have expanded family, and they are told go to the settlement in the West Bank, expanding.
Go West, baby.
Go west. Very short distance of traveling, and they had donors from in the United States, but also, what more important, they get funds from the government.
The other people with 12 children.
And they didn't have necessarily 12 children. They are not the ultra-Orthodox with 12 kids. They have 6 or 7 or 8. But they created the system. Look, you look at the system of circles of family, you have youth movement, Bnei Akiva, then you have PTA, then you have military preparation, Yeshivot Esder, then you have Yeshivot Ulpana, secular religious seminar only for women.
My granddaughter's going
And
there
all
this
of
year.
them, and all of them eventually are meeting together to procreate and have shidduch. You create a circle that will procreate, have young family that will be established at the age of 20 to 22. I mean, my cousins, all of them got married at the age of 22. My first cousin, who is my age, he is moderate. He has 6 kids, 40 grandkids, and 10 great grandkids, my age.
Mamma mia.
But all of them, but they are working. It's not that they are on getting on the.
Emily's planning to be a doctor, and she's
So
going to
you
PA.
have pharmacists, dentists, entrepreneur, teachers.
Medical,
So they want Israel to survive.
absolutely.
They are ordinary people inside the general population working. And they live in satellite communities, some of them in the West Bank. And that's the interesting part, is they create their own circle of enhancing, but the fearful part, what is fearful, is the relationship to the notion of state and the state democracy and the rule of law. They believe that the rule of law, that the government is as good as it obey its primary responsibility to inhabit and populate the sacred land of Judea and Samaria. If it violates that oath, if it is ready to give anything of particular portion of territory, then it violates the covenant with the people and they can ignore it. And that's the danger. And so they obey the charismatic leadership, the rabbis. And charismatic leadership, it depends on some kind of divine aura over their head. And this is not what a democracy, and a democracy that we're familiar with, working. It's like an ayatollah. We know ayatollah very well, how dangerous they are. What if you have ayatollah, religious ayatollahs? When they wanted to blow up the Dome of the Rock, they didn't do it because they couldn't find a responsible rabbi to authorize it. They had the tools. I
Oh,
mean,
yeah.
they had the know-how, the military know-how, they had the explosive. Can you imagine bombing them? And one of them said they wanted it in order to accelerate the coming of Messiah. If they topple it, then we need the catastrophe to happen before Messiah ben David is coming. Messiah ben David, let's bring everything down. Then we have a Gog of Magog. You have a war. And then Messiah will come and save the people of Israel. And guess what will happen then? All those secular will be God-fearing, observant Jews. That's a lunatic
I
kind
have
of mindset.
a question.
Yeah.
If the Messiah didn't come for the 6 million Jews that were
What do you
burned,
want? You
They were all
hey,
Ashkenazim.
well, I mean, too, then why would they come? Why would the Messiah come?
Look,
for-
I'm a non-believer, as I said. I had a conversation.
The answer is Messiah has mysterious ways.
Yeah, my mother is survivor of the Holocaust. My last conversation, because she passed, I mean, she was lucid to the last moment. She said, I'm going to die in 2 hours. And she did. And I said to her, how could you be such a believer? She said, what was the alternative? And for me, it's,
And she became a believer.
no, she was all her life a believer.
She, all her life.
All her life, during the Holocaust, she was a very strong woman.
At what age she passed away?
Say it again.
At what age she?
94.
Wow.
She was very sick.
Oh,
She had a heart condition. And from the age of 20, she was supposed to die any day. And she buried 3 of her cardiologists. You know, God worked in mysterious
Yeah.
ways.
I wasn't clear on how the rabbis were accepting of other forms of terrorism, and they weren't okay with bombing the.
Well, they did not approve the bombing, but Moshe Levinger himself, a rabbi, was condemned and was convicted for killing a child on the street.
But that's why I'm saying I didn't really understand that they weren't taking politics into consideration, and they were not
They
okay
become
with.
very political, but not in the formula of the religious party. They did their own things and in different ways with different political parties.
You think?
Yes.
Oh, and they make a big distinction between vengeance against an individual or mass vengeance. It seems like the mass vengeance, they seem to equate that as somehow with terrorism, right?
Right.
As opposed to
Yeah.
an individual, you get even with an individual.
Mhm. Yeah, it's not the ideology, but the revenge motivates some of them. Yeah.
May I ask a question?
Yes.
The reading on the very interesting reading on the Gush Emunim, and I've forgotten the author. It makes I'd like to challenge a factual premise. It's implicit and sometimes explicit that everybody in Israel, with a tiny exception of a certain group of religious Jews who were taught by Rav Kook, the younger Rav Kook, thought that Israel was facing overwhelming odds and that only some miracle or equivalent could save the state. And I was living in Chicago at the time and I was old enough to take all this in and feel that they were in great danger. But only in recent years have I learned, as you know far better, that historians have shown that the top leadership in the country, in the military and the intelligence services, were carefully calculating and were quite confident that they could win if they had the excuse to move into the West Bank. I'm oversimplifying, but only just a little bit. in other words, there was a rational calculation that it was far from a miracle. It was going to be an advantage to the state as long as it was willing to suffer substantial casualties if the Arabs made a move, and I think King Hussein moved troops across the river. And I don't mean to go on too long, but the premise of this article is that the only people who didn't believe that Israel had the substantial advantage were a tiny religious minority. And I don't think the other group, which is the leadership, is mentioned there in that article, in the chapter. Am I getting something wrong there? Because there was a great deal of historical research.
I'm not clear what I don't follow you. What do you say? You're
I'm
talking
saying,
about 67, the War of 67?
yeah, 67.
Right. And you are saying basically that not only the religious parties were fearful of what could happen, or
I'm saying that, as we know from historical research, in just the past 10 years, maybe, this picture that we all had in the world that Israel was facing overwhelming odds, blah, 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 was not correct, according to the view of the people in the government who were wanting to see an excuse to move on to the West Bank. This was the historical materials.
So you're suggesting that Israel really wanted to move and conquer these territories, and they were looking for an excuse, or
I'm not suggesting. I'm saying that historians have shown from the documents that in the top leadership, this was understood. If the Arabs made this monstrous miscalculation, that they would move and that they would succeed. There were not enormous difficulties, but I'm surprised if you don't feel that was clearly, because I didn't bring with me, the materials, but this was when the historical writing was done just a few years ago.
A perspective. The historical perspective in hindsight, it's a tricky business. You've been to Israel, right? You saw the size, and in hindsight to say, well, you could have known that you are going to win. Really? You don't.
It was a Russian roulette.
It's unclear. This stuff is unclear. Like in 73, the opposite thinking, well, we are an empire, no one can threaten us. And all of a sudden, whoops.
And it was only
when
6
you
years
go
later.
to war, you never know what will happen. In Yom Kippur War, after 2 weeks, I was in the front line. We ran out of ammunition in the tanks. And had it not been for Nixon, Kissinger, I don't know who was there, Nixon gave the order to transfer non-stop flight with ammunition to Israel. Who knows what would have happened? So, tricky business war. They did say there was a belief that Israel is going to wipe out the Arabs, and at the time, what is name? Head of security, forgot his name, flew to DC, had a conversation with head of CIA, and the head of CIA told them, you are going to leak them out. So that was an implicit nod of approval to Israel to start a preemptive attack on 5th of June, and within a day, they started the preemptive attack. Oh, but you never know. What if Nasser had started a preemptive attack? I mean, for 2 or 3 weeks, the entire country of Israel was on the front line. All the country. And for 3 weeks, you didn't know where it's going to end up. I mean, digging mass graves in Tel Aviv and in Haifa.
Israel was defending himself. It was not the country which was to conquer intentionally the territories of the West Bank. it was just a collateral event which happened and
Yeah.
then
I
They
mean,
were deciding
no, no one really was thinking with this Machiavellian thinking, wow, let them start a war and we can go and conquer the West Bank and have this wonderful
Never did hear it.
territory. In hindsight, I'm not sure. We are in such a horrible dilemma now with when you rule over such a massive group of people. And my other life, I was there for 15 years working with Arabs and Israelis. Maybe I'll do another class on behalf of State Department. So I have two hats to watch things. What can undermine democracy? What can undermine democracy? Terrible story.
Well, Arie, as you're talking this way, for about 2 of my 20 years in the US military, I was in civil affairs, which is the division of the military, which goes into a country that's conquered and creates democratic institutions and recreates infrastructure. I have a sense that the Israeli military has that there is nobody, there are no dedicated soldiers whose job it is to reestablish civil society in conquered lands.
Yeah, when you go to, I'm drifting away from the topic, but if you're in a civil society in a place like Ramallah, Bet Jala, Bethlehem, okay, and you have checkpoints manned by Israeli soldiers, some of them are new recruits, and people are moving in and out constantly on a daily basis. Some of them are extremely rude, some of them are gentle and nice. It depends who they are, and it shouldn't be like that. And you create enemies by the way that you behave toward a local population on a daily basis. And I had a conversation with the secretary of the Israeli government because what I did. And I told them, you need to create on the checkpoint, like entries to airport, a professional, a group of people who will treat them as they treat tourism, with professionalism and not with the behavior that is inappropriate. For example, at one point I was in the West Bank in a checkpoint near Ramallah. And at that particular day, there were people, new soldiers who came from Russia. And they were rude and unbelievably rude. And you cannot converse with them even in Hebrew. Their Hebrew was broken. They knew only a few words. So I went to the commander and told him, totally inappropriate. You really need to be, you create enemies. You don't hit car windows. You need to be polite. You need to be polite. More 95% of the population are just people who are moving on their business. They just live here. You don't do that. So that's one of the problems that I encounter on a daily basis when I travel in and out from Israel to the West Bank. So that's, and more I can talk about it more and more and more. But I'm coming back to Gush Emunim, and Gush Emunim policies were checked for the first time in the evacuation of Yamid. And I can talk because I was there. They recruited us in 82. My son was born. And immediately afterward, I was in the Sinai, and they recruited about 20,000 military, and our brigade was 5,000. We were at the outskirts of the southern part of Yamit. I was in charge of a block to block, but we didn't know what. We didn't know anything. And the day before, a commander comes and said, listen, tomorrow night, the Mitnachalim, the settlers from Gush Emunim are going to come your way, and your job is to block them. So I had a big machine gun. I put it on in the middle of the road, and they came, and the two buses, and I said to them, and I had 4 soldiers with me. I said, one move, and you don't have tires. And they looked at me, and they realized that I'm serious, and they turned around and went to try probably a different way.
What was their objective?
Well, if you read the article, they said if Israel is going to evacuate the Sinai as a result of the peace with Egypt, this is a precondition to the evacuation of the hardcore land of Israel, which is the West Bank. And they brought some rabbis who came with the ideology that the biblical reference of the Holy Land included also part of Sinai.
Wow.
You remember that. So we had a situation that Levinger went inside Yamit and went to a basement, and he had bombs. He had explosive, and he took cyanide pills, said he is going to be a martyr, commit suicide. So the two chief rabbis were flown by helicopter to convince him not to commit suicide. The other group were Kahane, which we are going to do next week, and they had explosive, and they said that they are going to blow themselves in a bunker. And they flew Kahane in a helicopter. Netanyahu, I'm saying, Begin, the prime minister, asked Netanyahu to come in person and to ask Netanyahu what
It's on your mind.
where my mind is.
Where you sleep.
So, unfortunately, I'm not asleep. And they asked Kahane to come, and Kahane came and convinced them not to commit suicide. So all these religious people from the West Bank came to Yamit and to this other agricultural settlement, who were mostly inhabited by Labour Party people, and they were ready to move on. They were ready to evacuate, most of them. There were a few skirmishes, but they were not as intense as with the religious people who came from the West Bank. 20,000 soldiers, can you believe it?
I had a clarifying question about halfway through the reading. Then I was kind of confused with this. They were talking about the three tenets that kind of defined the party, and they called it unequivocal, and there was some other word they used that to me felt like the opposite of unequivocal. So I was just kind of confused. The tenets were like the rule of law, democracy, and maybe the Arabs. And they said like the unequivocal, and then something that felt like the opposite. So were they, like the rule of law, for example, were they pushing for that or pushing against that?
Very good question. The rule of law is important. What rule of law? So there is a law. What rule of law are they going to observe? Maybe they should observe the rule of law of the Torah. Or they wanted to have their own court in the West Bank, to establish their own court, not the court of the State of Israel. If the State of Israel or the government is compromising the sanctity of Eretz Israel, then they violate the covenant with the people of Israel. And that, according to some of them, that's totally unacceptable. There is one rabbi, Amital, from Gush Emunim, who said, you are going way out of line. This is not what halakha means, the sanctity of the land of Israel at all costs. It's not part of what halakha is talking about. You shouldn't do it.
And what does Galahad talking about?
Halakha is talking about Yahareg v'Bal Yavor. You do not give up at all costs Avodah Zarah, the Torah, and the people of Israel. And the Rabbi Cook and his school said Avodah Zarah means the land of giving up inch of the land of Israel. The land of Israel, of Eretz Israel, not the state of Israel, the land. And he said, this is not what halakha said, period. This is a wrong interpretation. There is never a sanctity of the land. Land was always part of deals and compromises. And that would become a heated debate, and he was a charismatic leader. And people, he has his own followers in the.
But if you follow his logic, then the entire project of Israel is illegitimate.
Why? I mean, you compromise. There is no ultimate anything. You compromise all the time.
With the previous commitment, we have to leave.
Take care. It's wonderful to have met you.
Very
All the
interesting.
best. Rambam is it. Take care.
Zionist principle is that we return to the land which historically was the.
Yeah, but you always, the land, what is the land? There is one interpretation from the Prat and the Chidekel to Nahar Mitzrayim. I mean, from Iraq to Egypt. I mean, we are always in some kind of a compromise all our lives. If you go to the Bible, I can do a class on Bible on this one. You see how they're constantly and continuously the kings of Judea and Israel had compromises, always had some kind of deal with other kings in the neighborhood. There is no ultimate.
So the question is, to what degree you compromise? To what degree you compromise?
That's always the
So
question.
there is something which you do
No.
not compromise
Right.
as well.
Absolutely, absolutely, it's true. And then you have another question that's for a different class. How can you compromise with someone that doesn't recognize your right to exist? But that is always the case. And in my conversation with Arabs, is it taped or not?
Yes.
I cannot talk,
I believe it is being taped.
so I cannot talk.
Speaking Hebrew.
No. No. So forget.
Forget.
I cannot on recording stuff said what I met with Arab leaders.
Just you spoke with different Arab
I didn't
leaders.
say
Some of
what
them
I said.
spoke one thing and another was.
No, it's an issue.
So
it's
where
an issue.
did you meet a lot of Arab leaders who were intent to compromise?
Always,
somehow?
only with people who want to compromise.
Yeah, but, Islam says that you cannot give away the land as well.
One, yeah. So here you have two components. One, Gush Emunim, the ultimate, they have also variations. And then you have the Waqf, two ultimate fundamentalist approaches. And then you have the notion about terror, legalizing terror activities like you have with the Jewish underground. They just need for authorization of a rabbi to kill innocent civilians.
God forbid.
They wanted to bomb buses with Arab children in Jerusalem, and the Israeli security service managed to have the information. They had an inside information. They blocked it. God forbid what would have happened.
So it will never happen. It will never happen. The same as
Why?
when
That's
Begin.
a statement that's
How can you say
untrue.
that? This kind of talk.
Remember Rabin and
Well,
who was the
this kind of talk led to assassination of Rabin by ultra lunatic fundamentalists of the Gush Emunim persuasion.
I will talk publicly because I really do have a pretty aggressive point of view.
Yeah.
That I don't think that we as Jews can treat others like we were treated before. I don't, because to deny Arabs a homeland, I think is a shanda, because just as we deserve a homeland, so do they. And that's where compromise comes in. Of course, my other point is, I believe in making compromise, but I also believe that if you make a compromise and you don't follow it, then we'll bomb you to hell. I'm a very violent man that way, but I said, make a compromise. But if you don't want to follow it, there'll be a rule and we'll enforce it. But the rule has to be fair for both sides. I mean, I can't see the wisdom of keeping millions of Palestinians cooped up in basically concentration camps. I can't see how that's consistent with our values.
But in the world, there were 700,000 of refugees. They all were absorbed and reconciled in different countries. The Palestinian issue is totally artificial and it's specifically
Political.
Palestinians are openly used as the toy in order to keep the Israel in the situation which it is now.
Yeah, there is, of course, the reference in the chapter. What do you do? How do we define Arabs? Are they legitimate citizens of the state? According to the interpretation, the religious interpretation, they are ger toshav, which means they have limited, but not full civil acceptance as citizens. And that's a problem. And that is a problem. What do you do with Israelis, Arab Israelis in the state of Israel in 1948 borders? The problem. And some of the Gush Emunim approach is, well, we give them civil rights, but not full political rights to vote. And that's undermine the sense of Israel as a democracy.
That's what we have now. We have 11 people, 11 Arab representatives in the Knesset. So there is not a single country in the entire Near East where the democracy is so advanced and true as in Israel.
No one.
So that's the compromise. That is the compromise.
So we should become part of We are with Netanyahu revolution. We will become part of the Middle East. He is going to I'm sure you are following the intense demonstration against him. He said to the Supreme Court of Israel, the revolution, that they shouldn't basically put him on trial. And this is one element. The other element is the fact that the revolution in the law should be touched by the Supreme Court because this is a fundamental law that he changed. And the Supreme Court Justice Chayut said to him, and she's from the Likud family, and she said to him, when you undermine and you want to destroy the authority of Supreme Court, it's absolutely the right of the Supreme Court to rule on this question with the full plenum of the Supreme Court with our 15 judges. So that will take place in September. Now, if the Supreme Court decide that this what he did is against the principle of the Israeli democracy as expressed in the Declaration of Independence, we will have a constitutional crisis. But that's part of what is considered to be the fundamental of the identity of the state of Israel. Then we will have a crisis, and some of the leadership in the military, in the Mossad, and in the Secret Service said that we will obey the Supreme Court decision. Then we will have a major crisis. We are already in a crisis.
Israel is the country where they go from one crisis to another crisis.
But you know, Israel is a country that is basically by the Middle East neighbor. They are looked with astonishment. And I'll tell you when is it, because I said it rather, but you were not here. I was in Jordan, and when Prime Minister Olmert went to jail.
Yes.
He spent 2 years in jail. And it was broadcast first thing in Amman. And I was in the supermarket and I talked to the owner of the supermarket, and I thought he is going to berate about the corruption of the Israeli government. He said, what a democracy. I wish we had it here.
See, it's a life.
And here.
But in Israel, also the president went to prison for 7 years on rape charges. Katsav,
We could do that too.
7 years in prison.
Not enough.
Not enough, but 7 years is better than nothing.
No, it's a very difficult.
Not enough.
Oh, about Katsav or about the Karan?
Both.
Okay,
Okay,
I think we are going to get even worse horrible thing when we discuss next week reading about the quasi-fascist Kach movement.